Hello, I'm gonna make a short video to try and recreate the steps that we showed during the lesson. Unfortunately, the lesson video was corrupted, especially this part, so I'm gonna try and do this so that you guys can have a better idea on how to actually approach the animation of the turn movement itself. So the very first step, which is the most important one, is to actually pose your character so that it's in balance, that there's a interesting type of pose that actually communicates the emotional state of the character, etc., etc. Don't forget to do the hands themselves so that you have a nice relaxed pose of the hands, and also always keep every pose that you have in balance. Now, if you keep all those things in mind, I'm just going to show a couple of steps where you can actually see how to think about and how to use the rig correctly. It doesn't matter if it's Max or Maya. So the rule number one is, if we're turning and we're turning 90 degrees, we're not turning 180 degrees, don't do this. So do not rotate the underlying root mover. That one needs to be completely planted and does not actually contain any animation in this assignment. Instead, what you want to do is you want to manually rotate each of the platforms, for example. Whoopsie daisy. So you can manually rotate and reposition, and you can rotate the hips and reposition as well, so that you can actually have a turned state instead. So once that's done, let me just go back to normal. Make sure that you're also in, let's get here, in step curves as default, so that you can actually set the step keys. And once you have the other turn pose ready, then you should be ending up with something like facing forward, and the second main is facing to the other side. So that's good. Now the next thing you need to do is, whenever we have a movement of any sort, we need to sort out what's happening with the feet and the hips themselves. Now, as far as the turn goes, we have we need to kind of decide what moves first and when. So, as demonstrated before, when we're turning, we usually lead the movement by having this foot on the side of the turn, turning first, and then the other one that was planted moves afterwards. So I'm going to hit N and go into animate mode, and roughly around the middle I'm going to just make sure that first this foot becomes planted, and I'm not going to add any keyframe. I'm simply going to change the timing of this keyframe, and we'll sort this mess, of course. So first this happens, then everything else, right? So this is just the beginning, and during that time we can also maybe try and sort out a pose so that we have something that actually works okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the hips, lower them down a little bit, and I'm going to make sure that my knee aims are actually pointing in the right direction, so that we can introduce this, so that we can introduce this turning. My goal is to actually look at this section around the hips and the section around the ankles, so that they don't have too much excessive deformation. So this one is going to be a little bit tricky, but the balance is kind of there. Alright, so now that I have this, now I need to think about the balance itself. And considering that we have just switched onto the weight onto this foot, we still have quite a lot of weight here. So, but it's a little bit too much, because as you can see, if I draw an imaginary line, it's way past the heel. So we should move it a little bit back and a little bit up until it's there. Okay, this is a bit better. Now let's see from the front. The balance is all right. It's there we go. This is a little bit better. So now we actually have this situation, and I need to return the knee aims to their original positions. So I'm simply going to copy the keyframe from frame 1 so that when we turn we have this normal type of situation, and now we have a bit of a turn. So now it's actually getting there. You need to kind of make sure that during this period it would be useful also to actually pose and think about the looking ahead and these kinds of things. So basically I know that my shoulders and the upper body is going to lead the motion a little bit, so I'm just going to pose that as well in this in-between pose, but don't forget to also return them back to default position. Actually, yeah, this should work fine, I think. Let's see. Like this. And actually, I want to end up looking straight, somewhere around here. Something maybe like this. So that we actually turn looking and then straighten out. Okay, so this kind of makes a bit more sense. What I don't like when I scrub through this is that this arm remains quite focused and almost still between these two frames. You can see that it's very, very still. So I'm just going to move it also at the same frame. I'm just going to move it a little bit back and out, because we are turning a little bit. And I'm going to do the same or the opposite to this arm as well, because we are turning and this one's going to lead a little bit, and adjust the orientation of the wrist a little bit here. Okay, so let's try and see how this looks. Okay, so far so good. Let's see from this side. Okay, better. So once you have these three main poses, let's say that your turn has been blocked out. Of course, this is not good because there's I don't really like this kind of bendy pose. It's not something that I think works, so I would need to adjust these things a little bit more. And also in this pose during the 40, I'd like to actually rotate these guys, not you, lower body. I would like to, there we go, rotate a little and make sure that he's not, okay, and also not you but you, a little bit down, there we go. Okay, so now we have a bit of a better pose. So every pose that you strike, especially the mains, you absolutely have to be sure that they are posed well. So that's going to take a bit of time to actually strike a good balance, and you constantly need to scrub the animation itself so that you can actually see what are things that are catching your eye, so to speak, so that you can actually fix them and change them. So more time you spend during this process to fine-tune those poses, better your final result will be. So let's say that this is that I'm happy with this, and now I need to kind of move a little bit forward and decide on how to get these feet to work. Well, I could start adding more keyframes at this point, but actually what I would like to do is, let me just press hold. At this stage I would like to actually convert everything to automatic keys. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of the step key mode, and I'm going to switch to auto tangent mode so that any new keys that I set are actually automatic. Then I'm going to go into the curve editor, and I am going to zoom out as much as I can, and I'm going to select all all 3 keyframes for all objects, and then simply hit A. So once I've done that, the animation itself is going to change, and there's going to be some problems, and we have the main problem is going to be this sliding. I'm going to close Curve Editor. Okay, that's really weird. Just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to close the Curve Editor, and now I can analyze in a much better way what is happening and what needs to happen. And the first thing you need to focus on once you convert to auto keys, and the very first thing you clean up are the foot platforms and the main hips mover. Once you have that defined, you have defined your weight distribution and handling of the weight, and that's priority number 1. So I'm actually going to now define what the problems are. The first problem I have is that the feet are sliding and they're not planted. So what needs to happen is that this foot, instead of constantly sliding from this position to that position, it actually needs to remain planted for a while and then simply move and then be planted. And the exact same thing needs to happen to the other one as well. So I just need to kind of decide on the timing of things. How do I make it planted? Well, I simply copy the key to another place. So let's say here. And now this foot is totally planted, and it moves from this keyframe to that keyframe, and then it's planted itself. Okay. I have some weird deformations here, which is something that we're gonna also fix with the knee aims. But for now, I'm not focusing on that. I'm focusing on the platforms themselves, nothing else. So if I hit play, that's a little bit too fast for my taste. So I'm going to try moving it like this. A little too slow. Okay, a bit better. So let's say that I'm okay with that. Now that would be 18 frames. I'm going to try and keep the same thing on the other foot as well. So I'm going to need to decide when this other foot needs to actually start moving as well. So it has to remain planted until this foot has a secure footing, so to speak, and then only then it can start moving. So we plant our foot at 40. That means that this foot can, the earliest time when this foot can start moving is frame 40. So that we get to have planted foot and then it starts moving. So let's try and now see what we get with 58, so that we have 18 as well. Right. So now that's a bit of a start. It's a little bit too uniform, but it starts. Now at this point, the knee aims are starting to bug me. So I'm going to address that issue because it's striking different poses, and that's not something I like. Now, the way that I should actually fix this is you can try and eyeball it, or you can think about what is the problem. Well, the problem is that the knee aim is continually also gliding to the next position like this one used to. So all we need to do is just repeat the same position and keep it planted until the frame when it actually starts moving. So I'm just going to copy the keyframe so that the knee is planted and then it moves along with the platform, and then we actually get everything the way we would want it to be. So that's the same thing I'm going to do with the other aim as well. So we placed that at 58 and this one at 40. So, and at this stage I need to kind of get rid of them in the betweens so that, yes, so that we have a bit more natural type of turning here. So this one here is good, but this one here at 40 I'm not too happy with. So we need to make a bit of an adjustment here. In this case, it does need to turn because the hips are turning. Alright, and one last thing I really don't like is that we end up with this situation here, which is not fun. So at 58, I would like to actually move this kind of forward as well, so that we have good poses. Now this type of this problem you address a little bit later, or we can actually address it now if you wish. So we could retime the rotation of the entire body up until, let's say, frame 58, which is when we stop rotating as well. I think that would be this foot. Oh, 57. Nope, that should be at 58. So that everything is at the start, it's all in sync. That means that at this point I can just simply copy the previous keyframe to 58 and the same thing here, so that we actually stop our turn as far as the lower body is concerned at frame 58. I'm not looking at the upper body at this stage at all. So with these fixes, I'm starting to get better control over my lower body. Now the final step whenever shifting weight is to make sure that we actually lift our foot and then move it. So the action is always we have to lift the heel a little bit, and then we reposition our foot, and then we plant the heel back. So this is exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to find, so we start moving from frame 22, and then we end moving at frame 40. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this guy, and I'm going to, we start moving at frame 22, right? So at frame 22 we need to be in the air. But let's say 2 frames before that we need to be planted, or maybe 3 frames, so that we get this type of, well, let's try 4, so that we get this type of action of lifting the heel and then moving, right? So we lift our heel, start moving, and by frame 40, when we actually are done with moving, I'm going to copy the keyframe itself and the other one as well, so that we plant, right? So we have lift, move, plant. Lift, move, stop moving, plant. Except, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other foot as well, but we will have to introduce a little bit of an overlap here to make it a bit more natural. It's going to find the timing here. It's 40 to 58. I'm going to do the exact same thing here. So at frame 40 we need to, oops, this is the old file. Let me just fix this real quick. There we go. Alright, so back to animate mode. At frame 40 I'm going to lift the heel, right, so that we are not planted. I'm going to copy the previous one 4 frames before. And then I'm going to, so we have plant, but we will address this because we have this issue, right? Where both heels are in the air. But for now I'm going to ignore it because I want to finish this foot first, the turn itself to 58, and then we should plant. So I'm going to copy the keyframe of the heel up to 58, and then copy the planted keyframe to 62, so that we have the same action of lift, move, stop moving, plant. Alright. Now we need to address a couple of problems. First one is obviously this. So we should delay the entire movement of the foot, needs to be delayed by a little bit. So I'm going to move it, let's say 4 frames forward, simply to have planted foot and then the other one as well. So let's move it 2 frames forward more, so that I do not have even one more frame. There we go. So now we have to have at least one frame where we have both heels on the ground. We can't really just have a little hop. So this is better, but it's really, really artificial, because it's just like zzz, it would work for a robot. But since we're humans, we need to introduce a little bit of an overlap. And the thing that makes it so artificial looking is that that's segmented type of movement. So we have first lift, then move, stop moving, then plant. That's not what we do in reality. In reality, we actually glide from one to another, and we have quite a bit of an overlap between all of these. So what needs to start happening is that we need to start lifting the heel, then start moving, and then start planting the heel and stop moving as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to offset the time for the ankle itself, so that we get, if we start moving, if I see that we're starting to move at frame 22, then I'm just gonna move it like this so that we start moving, and maybe even more. There we go. So we just start lifting, and immediately the next frame we start moving as well. And for the plant, it needs to happen. We go down here, we start planting our heel, and as we stop moving, we plant the foot itself. So that way, you get this impression that the heel is actually pulling the leg itself, which is exactly what we want, because we're shifting the weight. So I'm going to do the exact same thing with the offset here. So we're starting to move at frame 47, was it? Yeah. So I'm going to move this just a frame before, so that we start rotating. Good. And we are planted, yep, at this one. So I'm just going to move this a little bit back. And now, if I hit play, still a little stiff because of other reasons that we have to fix at some point, but it's a lot more smooth, and it kind of makes a little bit more sense. So that's kind of the most important part to actually get right. Now, once you have that right, and when you're actually happy with the timing, so if I'm looking at this and the timing is a little bit too continuous, then you actually go, I would need to fix those things and deal with the knees as well, because we've delayed the movement, right? So I delayed the movement of this one to 47, so that means that this one should also be on 47, etc. And you need to kind of make sure that these things are smooth. It needs to really look good. So in this case, I need to move it a little bit more as well, so that we get this more natural type of look. And now I'm ready to actually focus on the main problems of the hips mover. And the main problems of the hips mover is that it's moving way too smooth. It's just simply rotating. There's no weight shift, yet we are shifting our weight from one foot to another. So what actually needs to happen is that we need to prepare for the lift by shifting all of our weight onto this foot only. So by the moment when we actually start lifting and we start moving the foot, which is, let's see here, frame 22, we actually need to be fully balanced on one leg. And we could introduce this a little bit of a bend as well. So this is of course really extreme, but I'm just trying to illustrate a point. So let's now use this. Okay, so you will notice that the weight is now moving slightly back to this heel. We now move, we plant at 40. So we need to have our kind of balance at frame 40, which is still going to be heavily biased on the previous foot. But from frame 40, because now we have planted this foot, we should end up, by the time we start lifting this foot, we should end up fully balanced on this one. So in reality, what happens is that in between this shift and this shift, we anticipate that. So the moment when we are actually planting the foot itself, we are already shifting our weight onto that side, onto that foot itself, so that we don't have a bit, again, it's a little bit of an overlap happening. So what's going to happen here is, let's just rotate a little as well, and let's move it a bit forward as well, and a bit more back, because I'm trying to now get a lot of weight on this foot here. And let's bend a little bit like this. There. Here we'll adjust the rotation a little. Okay. So now we get shifting weight on this foot, and then shifting our weight. This is far too much, but we should end up around here, but not exactly at the same time when we plant our foot, right? Because it needs to happen a little bit later. So I'm just going to offset this and then try to find a good moment when it needs to turn. So when I would like this to be turned fully, let's say around 50 is good. And only now I'm going to return to frame 40, which is the moment where we planted this, and then adjust the position so that it's somewhere around between the 2 feet as well, that we are kind of balanced. The reason behind it is so that we can actually see the weight shift itself. And there we go. Something like this, maybe. We'll see. And that's far too much, so I'm going to be adjusting the timing of this, the amount of it, and all of it. It's going to be quite a bit of adjustments and fine tweaking until you get something that actually works. And maybe at the end I'm going to return a little bit here to be more balanced, so that we get this weight shift, weight shift, weight shift. It's subtle when finally finished, but it's quite important to actually get done right. At any given point, you always continually have to adjust the positionings of these knee aims so that you get a nice normal type of position. Let's see, we've moved our rotation to be up until 70, so we need to move this to 70 as well so that we have continuous rotation. And yeah, so it's starting to actually be a movement with some weight shift. Now naturally, because this is now done, or better than before, now we're starting to notice our upper body itself, and I can notice also that the timing is a little bit too slow. So what I can do is then I can manually either move keyframes a little bit back for each step if you feel that you're in control, or you can scale it by using the curve editor tools as we've talked about. So this is a starting point, and then you actually simply, that's your most important part, is to actually handle that weight shifting and the timing of the positioning of the feet when what happens, and then you actually continue doing the whole animation until you polish it, you tweak it, and you do all sorts of things. And this one is not finished. This is the one I was doing in class, until it actually starts looking something like much more smooth and much better. I mean, of course, this is the stage where the F curves have been cleaned. You can see that the weight shifting has been done. There's been quite a bit of work done here, and rotation of the hips themselves, lower body, upper body, shoulders, everything else. But the starting point is pretty much the exact same one. So I hope that this helps, and yeah, good luck.